Had enough of noisy neighbours, took it into my own hands. So I moved into my block of flats about 3 months ago. There's a group of young adults that are constantly sitting on the stairwell behind my bedroom, smoking, laughing loudly, running about. One of them lives above me and plays loud music that they rap along to past hours constantly. I've tried reasoning and explaining I have a 2-year-old and I am disabled, we deserve peace, to no avail. I've called Noise Patrol, who they have just argued with and continued once they have left. Well, tonight I had enough. Tonight I'm home alone with my 2-year-old, and I've spoken to them once already. So I chose Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, the most rock song I could think of, one that my son is familiar with. Then I turned my TV up to 100, which I've never done before. It's pretty loud on 20 and has good bass for a lower-end model Samsung. I have misophonia, but I was so angry it didn't affect me. Then, just to add insult to injury, I started screaming the lyrics, "I can't sing for love nor money." Once the song ended, I turned my TV off. One guy said, "WTF?" and they turned their music off and have been silent since. I said to my husband, if this continues, I will turn my sound system on and play Baby Shark on a loop. I'm not playing games anymore. Best part is, the 2-year-old is still fast asleep. Tell DR you want to torture me with your gangster rap, I'm gonna torture you with middle-aged white guy music. The drunk a-hole that got served. Way back in the late 80s, my husband and I drove from Omaha to Kansas City to see The Who at Arrowhead. I was about 8 months pregnant, and this was our last getaway before kid number 2 came around to keep us tethered for a while. When we got to our minivan, I know. After the show, there were about 6-8 college-age kids in the vacant spot next to ours. They were drinking beers and having a good time. They were also throwing their empty beer cans everywhere besides a trash can. Everywhere mostly seemed to be behind and on both sides of our car. This wasn't a big deal, but we had to back out and didn't want to have to run over about a dozen beer cans. As we were getting into the van, one of us said to them, "Hey, would you mind just moving the cans behind us so we can back out and go?" Out of nowhere, one of the guys in the group went to crazy town. His chest got all puffy, and he started yelling at us like, "Who do you think you are, telling us what to you, blah blah blah." Now years later, I don't remember what he said. I just remember we looked at each other with WTF is going on here. My husband said, "Look, we just want to leave, so move the beer cans from under and behind our car." Crazy Town moved into a whole other realm of ballistic. He started slamming his palm against the van window hard, demanding that we make him move those cans. To this day, I am still amazed at the resilience of those Chrysler windows. His nuttiness provoked both of us, and we were both out of the van yelling at him to get away from our van. When it looked like a fight might break out between my husband and CT, I stepped in between. I didn't figure anyone was going to hit an 8-month pregnant woman. At this point, his buddies kind of pulled him back, but he was still mouthing off. We snaked our way forward between a couple of other cars and drove off with them, throwing fists and yelling. A few rows over, we noticed a couple police cars. We looked at each other and said, "Yup." We drove over and recounted what had happened. The officer saw my belly and told us to take him to them. So we drove back over. Crazy Town saw us and immediately jumped toward our van, clearly ready to resume his tirade. We pulled over into a parking spot, and that's when he saw the police car. The first thing the cop said was, "You boys having some fun here tonight?" We hear a round of "Yes, sir" from the group. Then the cop asked, "Are you old enough to be drinking? Let's see some IDs." The group got quiet, real quiet. The cop says, "I didn't think so. So the first thing you're going to do is pour out every can that's here, open or unopened. And when that's done, we're going to talk about your disturbing the peace charges." We watched as the cop pulled a full case of beer from the trunk and the kids started pouring out beer from the open case and the new case. Then we looked over at Crazy Town, waved out the window and said with huge grins, "Have a good night, bye." Still laughing. 36 years later. Still laughing. Kept a scammer on the hook. So this is an interesting one, small, petty, but satisfying. So about a year ago, I get a text message from a random number who claims to be the owner of the company I work for and says that he is out of town at a conference and needs my help with something. I immediately think this is odd because 1. It's not his normal number, 2. I know he is in his office down the hall, 3. He rarely ever texts and would just come by my office in person if he needed something. So I head over to his office and ask him if he knows anything about this. He clearly doesn't, so we know it is some scammer. He asks me to find out what they want. Lo and behold, they say they need me to go to the nearest grocery store and buy a bunch of Apple gift cards, take pictures, and send them to him. So I proceeded to spend the next 24 HRs stringing this guy along, saying, "Okay, I'm on my way. Oh no, my car died, gonna be delayed. Shoot, that car repair is going to use up all my money. Let me see if I can get a cash advance on my paycheck." On and on like this, and the scammer is still playing their game. Then finally, I tell them I have the cash and I'm going into the store now. After about 15 minutes or so, I break the news to them, "Since you are my boss, you know I am a compulsive gambler, right? Well, unfortunately, I walked past the lottery ticket machine and spent all my cash on scratch tickets. I'm broke now, but I did win a free ticket. So I got that going for me. Maybe that one will be a winner and I can finally get you your Apple gift cards you so desperately need. I think they finally figured out I was messing with them and never heard back. One of the most satisfying 24 hours I've spent. Threat of revenge was enough. I had a younger work colleague who thought it was fun to try and pick on the old guy at work. It'd go pretty tiresome after a while. His partner is a wee bit posh and the workmate is an engineer. This is important. I told him if he didn't pull his head in, I would put the stickiest chassis grease I could find under the door handle of his pickup when he least expected it. His response was, "So what, I'll just wipe it off." To which I replied, "No, not the driver's door, the passenger door." See how that goes when you have to explain to your missus why she has grease all over her manicured fingers. Problem solved immediately. The time I got jumped. I'm pulling this story out from way back in the day. It was pretty traumatic, so I'll never forget it. My parents had separated for the second time, and my mum and I moved in with my great-grandma and cousins. All together, there were 21 of us in the house. For a while, I was the house baby, until my little cousin came along, who is 4 years younger than me. However, everyone still doted on me and loved me dearly. I had a best friend at school named Bridget. I remember she was very light-skinned, and her mum would always do her hair in 3 or 4 long ponytails with hair barrettes at the ends. One day during recess, Bridget and I were making mud pies on the ground when 5 older boys approached us. Without cause, they started hitting and kicking us. They pulled our hair. I remember Bridget screaming as they pulled the barrette from one of her ponytails. They slapped us and shoved us into the dirt. I looked around crying, and the teacher was just watching with a blank expression on her face. She looked lifeless almost. If she wasn't breathing, she would have looked deceased. She didn't say anything as we cried all the way into the class. My older male cousin picked me up, and I was still weeping. He asked me what had happened, and I gave him a brief overview of events. Usually, he would talk to me the whole ride home, but he was clearly angry and remained silent. I got to my great-grandma's house and walked in dusty and disheveled, crying like a little punk. My great-grandma's eyes went wide as she looked at me. "Great-grandma, child, what happened to you?" Me crying like a punk, I got beat up. All 20 members, including my mum, listened to me recount my story. They all grew angry as they whispered among themselves. My mum was furious the teacher did nothing and said she would make an appointment to speak with her immediately. I was cleaned up, my hair was combed, I was hugged and kissed by multiple family members, given $2 by my great-grandma to go to the corner store with my older kid and tween cousins for some snacks. I returned to school the next day nervous for recess. It was a Friday. As recess rolled around, Bridget and I huddled together by a tree, keeping an eye out for our attackers. Suddenly, I heard the familiar voices of my older tween male cousin and 2 tween female cousins. "Cousins, hey, my name." "Me, hi. What are y'all doing here?" "Cousins, we came to pick you up." "Where are those boys that hurt you yesterday?" Bridget and I pointed to the boys who were roughhousing together some feet away. My cousins walked over and grabbed them. They put them in headlocks, jacked them up by the collars, shaking them vigorously, and shoved them into the dirt as they had done us the day before. Once again, the teacher just watched on like a dead body. My cousins threatened the boys that they would be back if they ever touched me again. They cried and said they wouldn't. We all went home, where they proceeded to take me back to the corner store for more snacks, followed by more hugs and kisses. My cousins were and are great. The thing is, the adults in the house all looked pleased when my cousins admitted their recess activities. That Monday, the boys approached us with a half apology, saying they were afraid of my brother and sisters. I replied in terrible English, "Me, them ain't my brother and sisters, those my cousins, and they said if you touch me again, they'll beat you again." They never touched me again. I transferred to a ghetto and heinous school a few months later. Fael being a bully to my husband? I'll hug the hell out of you. My FIL 75 is an abusive narcissist. He doesn't know how to handle feelings, doesn't know how to love or be loved, and he hates physical contact. When my Emil and him were still married, he beat her up regularly until my husband was old enough and hooked his lights out. This is for context. Now let's move to the present time. My SIL 52 died last Monday, and of course everyone is heartbroken. My husband has the same autoimmune disease as my SIL, and he felt really guilty he couldn't go to the hospital as often as he wanted. Yesterday, the whole family came together just to comfort each other, including my FIL. My husband stayed at home because his disease had a massive flare-up. When I came back from a smoke break, I heard my FIL discussing with my MIL, and soon I discovered the subject was my husband. Phil was mad because hubby didn't give him enough attention the evening SEL died. He accused hubby of wallowing in self-pity. If there's something my husband doesn't do, it's that. It was sheer projection. I stood up and waltzed outside. He shouted I didn't need to leave, and my response was, "That's my choice." I didn't want to make a scene. When I cooled down a bit, I went back inside and went back to sit on my place, right next to Phil. He grabbed my arm and wanted to talk to me privately, and I followed. He told me he didn't want to upset me and how it was my husband's fault because he ignored him. I told him thank you for the apologies and that it was a conversation for another time. And then I hugged him. Tightly. And long. I gave him a kiss on the cheek and went back to my conversation with my Emil. The look on his face was priceless, and this hug was the most passive-aggressive thing I could think of to do. "You bugged my car? Now you'll have Lo listen to what I think about you. A petty divorce tale. This gem of a story unfolded over the past few days, and I think it's too hilarious not to share. Not in the US or any other English-speaking country. I have a friend, let's call her Lisa. She's in her 50s, has been married forever, and has spent way too much of that time putting up with her nightmare of a husband. Lisa had thought about divorcing him more times than she can count, but she always hesitated because she knew he'd turned the process into a living hell. Well, 2 months ago, Lisa finally snapped. She decided it was time to break free and filed for divorce. Cue her husband, let's call him Todd the Terrible, immediately proving her right by going full-on paranoid spy mode. First, he installed surveillance cameras all over their house, which unfortunately is technically legal in our country as long as he's living there too. But Lisa's pretty sure he also planted some illegal listening devices because, get this, that's the exact advice he gave his brother during his own divorce. As if that wasn't creepy enough, Todd took her car for 2 days. Because it's the family car, he never uses the family car, as he got his own car right after she handed him the divorce papers. Plenty of time to slap on a GPS tracker or a few bugs, right? His excuse for all this James Bond-level nonsense? He claims Lisa is cheating. Spoiler alert, she is not. But here's the kicker in my country. Divorce means splitting everything 50-50 regardless, unless something truly extreme comes up. So even if Lisa was sneaking off to rendezvous with the entire team of Kansas City Chiefs, it wouldn't change a thing. Todd's tantrum is entirely pointless. Now Lisa doesn't have the time or money to check her car for gadgets, and the whole situation is understandably frustrating. So I suggested the perfect petty revenge, turning his creepy surveillance obsession against him. Now, when she's in the car, she regularly puts on a show, loudly announcing gems like, "Your deck's so small that need a microscope to find what you're working with. You're the worst sex I've ever had. And I've had bad sex. I feel sorry for your future dates. They'll need a search party to find any satisfaction. She's tried it a few times now and tells me it's more satisfying than therapy." The time my parents told me not to touch the thermostat. A few years back, I was watching my parents' house while they went out of town. My stepdad is a decent dude, but they were supposedly having issues with the thermostat, I say, supposedly because my grandmother was also living with them, and the three of them never agreed on temperature. When they were getting ready to leave, he told me don't touch the thermostat. I responded with something like, well, what if it gets too hot or cold? No, just don't touch it. Got it. For context, they live in the south, so we usually had and currently had the AC running. Well, lo and behold, a cold nothing crazy front came through. I don't prefer the cold, but I sure do enjoy being in blankets when it's cold. So as the temperature dropped, I just would add another blanket to my hibernation pile. But I sure as shit wasn't going to touch the thermostat. He made that very clear. By the time they got back, the thermostat was at 50 degrees. When they walked in, they immediately were like, "What the F? Is the thermostat broken?" I looked directly at them and said, "I don't know. You told me not to touch it." Idiot going the wrong way doesn't get the right of way. My grocery has narrow one-way rows of angled parking, and the lot is very busy. In part because there's a shopping mall attached to its feeder road, and jerks will often speed through the lot from the feeder road to avoid a stoplight. These entitled idiots frequently don't grasp the concept of one way, and cause traffic jams when they inevitably encounter drivers going the right way. It's dangerous that many other cars and pedestrians don't expect morons barreling down the road the wrong way. When one of these traffic jams happens, the easiest way to fix it is the person who's going the right way has to pull back into a parking space, assuming there's an empty one, thus enabling the wrong way idiot to pass. Recently I was shopping with a friend and, as expected, we pulled out of our spot, and naturally we soon met with a moron in a gigantic pickup truck, bombing up the road the wrong way, twice as big as my friend's car and radiating compensation. Well, it turns out she'd had enough of these people. On this day, most parking spaces around us were filled, but there was one right there that she could have pulled into. Mr. Small Dick Energy in the pickup felt so entitled to right of way, he even stopped far enough back so she could pull into the spot for his convenience. Rather than do so, she surprised everyone by exaggeratedly slowing down and stopping a few feet from his huge bumper. Mr. Small Dick Energy then had the nerve to rev his engine a few times and kept creeping forward threateningly, as if he was going to force us to back way up to the end of the aisle so he didn't have to do the same. My friend put the car in park and just waited. He then honked his horn at her as if she were the one going the wrong way. She pulled out her phone and started recording him. I was kind of scared he might road rage us to death, but he didn't. Behind us, the stoplight he should have gone through turned green, and I could see him seething as he watched all the normal drivers he thought he'd cut off getting their turn. In the end, infuriated, he threw his truck into reverse and slammed on the gas, backing up way too fast for a parking lot. About 4 parking spaces back, he miscalculated the angle of his wheel and wanged the back of his pickup on a cart corral. Not a disabling accident, and luckily he didn't hit a pedestrian. But I'm sure that'll cost him a pretty penny. He didn't even stop to get out and inspect the damage, most likely because he'd managed to publicly shame himself in such a grand fashion. It was so satisfying. Outsmarting your crooked partner can be very satisfying. Years ago, at 26, I entered a partnership in a small CD music store with a man in his 50s who already owned another store. The partnership was meant to share buying costs and advertising. Once we opened, I discovered he was skimming inventory, and we had leased a much larger space than necessary under the pretense of him subleasing the extra space for his office, which never happened. After 3 exhausting years, during which he continued his dishonest practices, the store went broke. We had around 25k in equipment and another 20k in inventory. Although he ripped me off, to avoid a legal battle, I agreed that we'd sell off the remaining inventory and equipment and split the profits. I needed to get away from him quickly, even though my share would be far less than what he took from me. My star employee manager, whom my partner had since taken to his other store, informed me that my partner was negotiating a sale of everything the next morning to settle a debt of his. Realizing my partner intended to keep me in the dark, I hired movers to empty the storage garage we had rented. I took back all my belongings early the next morning. As we were leaving, I saw the other truck arriving. Later that day, my ex-manager confirmed that the truck was from the debt collector. Their crew arrived to find the garage empty. They ended up in court, each accusing the other. It ended with my ex-partner still on the hook for his debt. I called him, acting like I wanted the update on when we'd sell the inventory and furnishings. He simply said it was stolen. I just hung up as if I was upset. I sold off the remaining equipment over the next year, slowly recouping part of my losses. Had he been honest with me, at least during our liquidation, nearly 20 kalods of that would have been his. In total, he took much more than that from me, so no, I didn't feel I took a thing from him. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, I spotted him in a restaurant parking lot as I was driving off. He smugly asked how I was doing, fully aware of his wrongdoing. I replied that I was fantastic. Then, with a huge grin, I said, "So, you still haven't figured out where the stuff went?" His smug smile turned to fury as I drove off, telling him to have a wonderful day. The accidental Cupid. Okay, so when I was in primary school, I was a bit of a chaotic little gremlin. I had this thing I'd do where I'd write fake love notes to girls, pretending they were from the sweatiest, stinkiest, most questionable guys in class. Why? Pure pettiness. It was my twisted way of getting back at girls I didn't like. There was this one girl, let's call her Wilma. I couldn't stand her. She was my mortal enemy in the 5th grade, for reasons I can't even remember now. And then there was Alex, the unfortunate sweaty guy of the class. Alex smelled like sour milk that had been left out in the sun, and he was a little on the chubby side. Obviously, I decided they were the perfect victims for my master prank. I carefully crafted a love note in Alex's handwriting, which was basically just a series of crooked chicken scratches that said something like, "Hi Wilma, I like you. Do you want to date me?" From Alex. I slipped it into her bag during lunch, thinking this was going to be the most epic prank of all time. After lunch, Wilma found the note and went absolutely bananas. She was showing it to everyone, saying stuff like, "OMG, Alex likes me." I tried to play it cool and asked her what it said, and she was all, "None of your business." Here's where it gets wild. Alex didn't even deny it. He just stood there, probably sweating even more than usual, and said something like, "Yeah, maybe I do." My brilliant prank totally backfired because, not long after, Wilma and Alex started hanging out during lunch. They'd sit together, giggling and sharing sandwiches, while I sat there stewing in my own failure. Fast forward to years later, I was bored and stalking Wilma's social media. Don't judge me, we've all done it. And guess what? She freaking married him. They have a kid together and everything. All because of me. I played Cupid without even meaning to. Sometimes I lie awake at night, wondering if I should send them an anonymous message like, "Hey, congrats on the family. BTW. Your whole relationship started as a petty prank. You're welcome." Her face went red in anger. I already posted this in other places, but thought I would share it here also. Quite some time ago, I worked as a worker at a very popular theme park in Florida. I've mentioned in other stories I've shared that I worked at an attraction. One day I was fast pass line greeter, and it was in the middle of peak season. We were ridiculously crowded with wait times for standby being 2 hours, single rider around 50 minutes and fast pass over an hour. We were instructed to allow people in on the time stamped on their fast pass to help thin the line. Sometimes, when it wasn't as busy, we would allow people to enter 5 minutes earlier than their ride reservation. A woman wearing white shorts, a fanny pack, and a white sun visor came walking up happily with her group and showed me her fast pass. I stopped her because it was 10 minutes early. I politely explained she would have to wait to enter on the time stamped on the fast pass ticket. Woman, oh come on, really? It's just a few minutes early. Me, I apologize, ma'am. Unfortunately, we are very busy, so you'll have to wait for the time on your fast pass. Woman. That's ridiculous. Everyone else let us in a few minutes early. Woman tries to walk past me, but it's not happening. I block her by stepping in her way. I smile and ask her to step to the side. Woman, ugh. I continue to let people in according to the times on their passes as the woman glares angry daggers at me. A man next to her tells her to just wait. It's not that serious, but she's fuming. Literally 3 minutes go by and she storms back up and shoves the pass in my face. Woman, good enough now. Can I go in now? Me trying to remain magical, ma'am. You still have 7 minutes until you can enter. Please step to the side. Woman, you're joking. 7 minutes. You're not seriously going to make me wait for 7 minutes. Me, yes. Please step to the side. Another 2 minutes go by as a line of people come in. I check everyone's time, not looking at faces so much, but hands and tickets when I see the same ticket. I look up, and it's the same woman again. She still had 5 minutes to wait. Now I'm irritated, and she's irritated. I just stare at her for a few seconds quietly before doing a 2-finger point back to the side where her group and others were waiting patiently. She stormed back off as my co-worker Kay walked up with my brake slip. The woman instantly got a grin on her face when she saw I was about to leave. Her grin pissed me off, and my petty box was immediately switched to on. I gave Kay a brief version of events and instructed him to make sure she waited until the exact time printed on the freaking fast pass ticket. He laughed a bit and said, "Okay." I walk away, but only a few feet when she sauntered over, arrogantly grinning to Kay, and shows him the ticket. "Kay, sorry, but you'll have to wait until the time printed on the fast pass, ma'am." Woman with her face turning incredibly red in anger. "Did she tell you to do that?" "Kay, I have to work with her." Me standing pettily a few feet away. I encourage indeed negative reviews. Sorta like the title says, except it's from my old job company. They feud me over bad and did me dirty, firing me for no reason, but the manager in charge felt threatened by me. I truly was a solid employee and had hunger to grow, learn, overwork myself, etc. This was a while back. My managers starting off were great. The last one was an external hire and couldn't answer a phone call, let alone should be a manager. He's too concerned about who he can bang and makes sure he only hires ones within a certain criteria that is completely inappropriate. The company has a 2.6 rating on Indeed. Constantly there are negative reviews and a few positive reviews. I would have had a positive review too if I wasn't working under a dirtbag for half my time there. Anyways, since that time I go back and make sure I thumbs up all the negative reviews as they come in. Doing this so no one else considers working with them, or to encourage that the negative reviews are in fact true to how they are. It's stupid and petty, but I'd celebrate if that company burns down. They fired me days before Thanksgiving. A single mother who had the top performance and saved the company millions. Yes, that's right, millions. Just another crooked corporate system. She made my hands freeze. Early February last year, my partner and I traveled to Japan, which was winter season. Midway through our trip, one morning we woke up to the aftermath of what was an overnight snowstorm. Excited, we both ran outside, danced in the snow and posed for photos. One photo my partner asked me to pose for what was me holding a snowball. Naive me, thinking it was a quick 5-second photo opportunity, obliged. However, she was taking her time, rotating the phone and telling me to hold still, and after the snow started to attack my hands with frozen temperature spells, I started asking, "Are you done yet?" And partner responds with evil grins and laughs before I realized what she was doing and dropped the pile of snow in defeat, whilst she laughed and pat herself on the back for a prank well done. Fast forward to last month, December, and we're back in Japan. The same town, and we're both just walking along the streets and admiring the Christmas and New Year's decorations. I'm basking in the views when my partner calls out, "Hey, look, photo please." I turn around and there she is, smiling, holding a pile of snow. I pull my phone out, and before I even do anything, my brain flashbacks to that awful minute in February 2024, when my hands were wronged, and how this was an amazing opportunity for justice. So I aim the camera at her, rotate the angle, say hold still for just a bit longer. A bit longer. Let me get this angle right. Damn, the brightness of the snow. Let me adjust that. Partner is looking at me dumbfounded, wondering why I'm taking so long for what she thought was a simple 5-second photo, until she spots the devilish grin on my face, and then the penny dropped. Did you just seriously wait 10 months to get back at me for that? Me grins. For the rest of the afternoon, she was in disbelief at how I still remembered what she did 10 months later and how I got back at her. But my hands got their sweet, cold justice. A petty war that's been going for decades. So, people of the interwebs, I bring you some of the short stories of the petty revenge war that exists since God knows how long. You see, my grandmother has 3 daughters, being my mother the oldest. Apparently, my mother and her younger sister have been on this petty revenge back and forth for so long that neither remember why and how it started. I only noticed it in my early 20s when I walked in on my mother, taking a bite on a raw potato that later ended up being served to my aunt as side for her dinner. She did that to get back at my aunt for taking a bite on a specific apple that she had bought to make a pie. My mother's words to me were, "You saw nothing." Over the years, me and my uncle, my aunt's SO, started discussing this petty and very funny war that has been going, since we both are in a privileged position to share each side of the behind the scenes. Some of these stories were told to me by my uncle because they happened before I was born, more than 3 decades ago. Others I actually lived them, some I was forced to play a part in them. Please enjoy this petty degeneracy. When my aunt was a yearly teen, she would steal my mother's makeup because she didn't have her own. My mother was not happy because she saved to buy her own stuff. Grandmother found out and punished her by giving her a stack of sheets of paper and making her write something every day, a prose, a poem, a letter, etc. She would get her own makeup when the stack was finished, and she couldn't cheat because my GM knew how many sheets there were. My mother took this opportunity to buy the same kind of sheet of paper and kept adding a sheet every day while my aunt was at school. This drove my aunt nuts because months later she was not seeing any progress with the stack not decreasing. Eventually my GM found out and out a stop to it. Now these ones are recent. Christmas is always celebrated either on our house or on my aunt's house. The guests cooks and the hosts clean. Don't ask me why, it has been this way since I remember. A few years ago on our house, my aunt used every single thing in the kitchen. Literally. It took us a couple days to wash it all. Next year, my mother rearranged my aunt's entire kitchen. She changed the placement of every single thing. She swapped whole drawers. My uncle says it drove my aunt nuts not being able to find her stuff on her own kitchen, and it took them far too long to reorganize everything again. Then, the year after that, my aunt took small parts of anything that was not a whole piece and hid them all over the kitchen. Quite genius. Everything seemed fine when they left, but then you want coffee. There's filter holder. Want to microwave? The plate is there, but not the little wheels underneath it, so it does not turn. Want a smoothie? The little lid on the machine that prevents everything to go directly into the ceiling is nowhere to be found. You get the picture. Everything was hidden, either inside pots we never use, mixed inside the flour bag, etc. Next Christmas, I noticed that my mother had a bag full of different food container lids in the trunk of her car when I was loading the presents on her car, but honestly didn't think much of it. When we left, the bag was still there, full of lids. As turns out, my mother had sneaked the bag to my aunt's house and swapped all my aunt's container lids with those she brought. Essential leaving my aunt with a bunch of containers and lids that didn't fit each other. Not a single fit. I found out a few days later from a call from my uncle, asking if we did something to the containers, because he found my aunt on the kitchen floor, surrounded by lids and containers bawling from frustration. This one is a fail. One of many, may I add, but I think it's worth mentioning. My uncle confessed to me that sometimes he and my aunt get into arguments because she spends too much money on gifts to my mother, but not in a good way. Apparently, whenever she buys clothes to my mother, she will buy my mother's size, and then the same exact clothing one size up. She is really good at sewing, so she swaps the tags in hopes that my mom thinks that she is increasing in size. So she double spends just to be petty. And it fails, because since my aunt lives in another country, my mom just thinks that where she lives the clothes are sized differently. I have heard my mom saying that in more than one occasion to her friends. It failed a few times already, but I got to be honest, that had the potential to be a mastermind play right there. I think this should be enough for now. This post is already super long. I have a lot more stories from over the years, but I don't want to turn this post into a book. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for reading. Don't pay me and treat me like dirt. I will hide and lock your company's files and ghost you. So for context, I started my teaching career as an ESL teacher in Asia. I worked from some pretty cool places, but the last place I worked at before I became a teacher was the worst. Let's call it English Center. For privacy reasons, I won't tell you the city or country as I am still working there. English Center had around 3 centers owned by the same owner. Now this center was run by an owner who basically used the business as a cash cow. He would overwork you and underpay you. I often had to threaten to take him to court to pay me on time. So I was contracted to work 4 classes a day of 1 hour each initially. Eventually I was given 6 classes and very little marking and contract time. On top of that, you were expected to work after hours and do marking during your lunch. I was also forced to be a center manager and admin. So not only was I teaching, I had to deal with admin and teacher and center issues as well. After being paid late for the 4th time, I decided I had had enough. So I started looking for a new job. I got a job at a new school and started my visa renewal process. This takes 4 weeks. I also didn't tell the owner I was leaving either. At this point, I also had admin access to the center server network. This had the entire syllabus and everything. It also had student progress and reports which were given to parents monthly. If this file disappeared, the school would be screwed. 4 weeks later, on my last day, the owner yelled at me for something silly. Can't remember what, and dumped an extra class on me, and then told me to work on my off day. At this point, I was seeing red and was about to delete everything. Instead, I selected the files and put a password, a random combo of letters and symbols on them, and then selected them to be hidden so they couldn't be seen. So if you clicked the file properties, one can see. I then simply packed my stuff and walked out into the morning sun. A while later, the owner tried to keep on calling me. At this point, I was on the beach sipping an ice-cold beer. I ignored him and continued ignoring him. After a year, I met someone who said that the owner couldn't find the files and was panicking because parents were demanding to see their children's progress. In addition, many teachers walked out, which resulted in him having to close his business. TLDR, ghosted files and ghosted owner. Sipped a beer while the world crumbled. Block my route. I'll take my grocery bags out and leave the cart in front of your door. At Whole Foods, some thoughtless dimwit was parked in the red no parking zone right in front of the doors. They were just sitting in the driver's seat, waiting. On my way out, there was no good way to go past them, other than to block all traffic by rolling directly down the main corridor of the parking lot. So I kept going, stopped when their car wouldn't let me pass, then grabbed my groceries and left the cart directly in front of their door. Then they followed me to my car and tried to park in a way to block me from exiting. But the joke's on them because they left me just enough room to reverse out, inches from their bumper, and I casually drove away. They were super surprised, and I'm sure they thought I was going to hit them. Luckily, I know exactly how big my car is, and I'm not afraid to use that knowledge.